Hello, my friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we are talking about the astrology of October. I am joined by my good friend Mercurius George, who is coming to us in the form of what is this, a 18th century portrait? Is that what we've
My
got going on
friends,
here? This is Spencer Michaud, and today we.
Sorry, it's a 19th century portrait by John Singer Sargent.
Oh, well, there you go. 19th century portrait. Um, so you can see that both Mercurius George and I have profile pictures here. And you may have noticed that my audio is a little bit different than normal. That is because my power went out in the last day, and I'm coming to you from an office building, my partner's office building here. So I am out of the house today and making the best of it. And and I thought it'd be interesting to be a portrait just like Mercurius here. So I see we've got some people joining us here in the chat. We've got Dee here from the UK, Remco joining us from the Netherlands, EY is here from California, EY Washington, nice to see you. Tarja is here from Finland. Let us know where you're coming from here in the chat box. And if you have any questions on the things that we're going to be talking about today. So it looks like they can't see our pictures here, Mercurius. So, oh well, our fancy portraits aren't coming through today. So it goes. But it's not going to matter in a minute. If you can hear us okay, then it should be good to go because we'll be sharing our screen here. So I'm going to share my screen just so that they can look at something more interesting, right?
Is it for all YouTube?
Yeah, exactly. All right. So how you doing, my friend?
I am doing pretty well. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to talk and have a conversation about the astrology of October.
Yeah. And so tell us a little bit more about how you came to do astrology and some of your journey here. You and I have been friends for quite a long time. Tell us a little bit more about what you've been up to.
So I can't always trust my memory completely, but as my memory serves me, I feel like my astrology journey mostly began in your house. I would say sometime around the fall of 2006. Pouring over an astrology book that we probably bought at Borders, or that you had bought at Borders, and you giving me a bit of a reading with what now we understand was a somewhat limited set of tools compared to where you are at and even I am at now.
Sure.
So but that time period was when I first really discovered astrology. For those who don't know, Spencer and I were friends through other means, through music, in Michigan, which is where I'm originally from. I now live in New York. I still do music. That's primarily my life is in music and other writing, but my astrology fascination has continued to sort of take over larger and larger chunks of my time and my energy, which I attribute to my North Node in the ninth house. And so, in the past few years, I've really gotten into Hellenistic astrology and other forms of traditional astrology. And I've studied with Austin Coppock, which is to say, I've signed up for his classes and peppered him with questions.
Yeah.
And
one of our favorites here on the channel, for sure.
Absolutely. And I started doing readings about a year and a half ago, something like that. So I've been doing readings for a while, and I just, I basically just get out of the way and let astrology continue to sort of demand of me whatever it demands of me. And the way that I approach it is not, I don't treat it as my profession per se, but I sort of have been learning to let it take up whatever space it wants.
Sure.
Which I find is more and more.
Well, and don't let anybody be under the illusion that Mercurius here is, not skilled at his craft just because it isn't his like main thing, 24/7. You and I have talked about archetypal living and archetypal experiences for over a decade now. And, I've always really enjoyed our conversations on philosophy, the universe, and things of that nature. So there was a reason why I encouraged you to maybe pursue this more, because I just thought you were really talented and really skilled in this field. So I'm really excited that you're here today with us. And for those of you out there that didn't know, so Mercurius here is, you kind of keep it a little bit anonymous, right? So that's why we're both kind of like behind the curtain here today. So the Wizard of Oz curtain today. But for those of you just joining us, I'm actually outside the house today because the power is out in my house. So I'm out in public in an office building with a little bit of a lower quality setup than normal. But again, we're going to make do. We've got some more people joining us in the chat. We've got Melissa coming here from Albany, New York. Nice to see you, Melissa. Lisa, thank you for the super sticker. We have a new type of thing that we can do here in the chat. After we reached 1,000 subscribers, we can do super chats and super stickers where you can make a donation to the show. So thank you, Lisa, for that. I really appreciate that. Dimfy is here from Schindel? Schindel, is that the Netherlands again, right? And then Jessica, another classmate from the Nightlight Astrology crew. So good to see you, Jessica. Glad that all of you are joining us here today. So Jared, why don't we dive in? What do you think?
Sounds good.
Ready to roll?
Yeah.
Okay. So you and I were talking briefly before we came on about some of the big themes of the month and kind of going over things. Anything that just sticks out to you right away about the overall broad brushstrokes of the month ahead?
Yeah. Well, if I could pick a single moment that sticks out to me, it's probably when, toward the middle of the month, when we have the Sun, Mercury, and Mars all meeting at a single degree. Even though the exact cazimis don't happen completely simultaneously, there is that kind of gathering of these planets. And even the moon is nearby. And there's a new moon, which is quite close to both Mercury and Mars. So I think that's really setting the flavor for the whole month. But I also was thinking about the month as a whole. And it feels to me like it's kind of divided into three parts, at least from my perspective, thinking it through, because we have so many planets passing through Libra this month. And when it first begins, we have Venus in Scorpio. And then we have Venus moving into Sagittarius. So, Venus is ruling all these Libra planets from Scorpio and then ruling them from Sagittarius.
Yeah.
And then the third part of the month, I guess, would be when the sun moves into Scorpio. And I just sort of found it helpful to sort of break it down into thirds like that. But there's plenty of smaller moments to talk about within those larger, and I'm sure we will, because I know how you
you know how I roll with my Virgo intricacy. Yeah, I love that. I love breaking it down into kind of these cycles where we have Venus, playing a quite an important role as the host of all these planets. Another thing I'd like to do today is kind of break down the sections into decanic sections, since you and I are both kind of disciples of Austin Coppock on some level. I like to talk about the aspects that are happening within a solar decan. So we're starting off this month in the first decan of Libra, and we've got kind of an interesting story that happens from one decan to the next. And one of the things that I've been seeing with Libra 1 is we have an awareness potentially of some kind of injustices or imbalances. We always had this kind of introduction of an energy in the first decan, a more stabilization in the second decan, and then kind of a resolution in the third. And so we may be going through this now as we are, going through the end of September as we're recording this. Yesterday we had the fall equinox where the the sun is going into the dark part of the year, where the night starts to become longer than the day. And potentially we're coming into an awareness of what we've harvested for the year since we were planting the seeds in the spring. So one of the things I wanted to just begin with is, how are you seeing that play out as far as just that harvest cycle and that shift? How are you feeling that in your own life and in the collective so far, Jared?
Oh boy. Well, yeah. 2021 obviously has been quite a year. In a weird way, we've settled into this, the whole experience of the pandemic almost as a way of life.
Mm-hmm.
So even just thinking about you posing that question and thinking about it right now, of a harvest of what we've kind of, what seeds we've planted and whatnot in 2021 and in this year, it makes me sad, to be honest.
Yeah.
To think about, because on one hand we were so hampered. There's so much that we can't do. So, it's like, what harvest? On the other hand, so much has happened, and we have, I think all of us have been learning to live with this situation on one way or another. And we've all tried to sort of move forward with our lives.
Mm-hmm.
I think particularly, starting around the spring, which was when, for better or worse, there was a lot of opening up in restrictions and, a return to activity in a lot of ways. And I think part of, the harvest that we're sowing now is like on some level, the consequences of those decisions, on some level, living with the kind of continuing uncomfortable realities of trying to, in Libran form, find balance between different priorities, different needs. And I just thinking about how, there was that, now I see it as a very brief moment of kind of unmitigated optimism in the late spring into the early summer. Which,
well, that was the Jupiter Pisces time, wasn't it?
It was.
Right.
And, I think that sort of set a lot of things in motion, which we now, we're basically, I think on a collective level, at least in the States, there was this sense of like, okay, we are now opening back up, right? And so that meant making a lot of decisions that were really not applicable until the fall, such as, opening schools. And in New York, it's like city workers coming back to, going back to the office has been something that I've been witnessing without a lot of plans. So I think part of what's coming up is like, how much did we take advantage of that brief moment before the Delta variant swept not just the US, but the whole world, to like actually figure out some good systems for how to deal with it. And now what's going to happen as we continue to follow through on this plan of opening up, whether it's wise or not, right? I don't know. I'm bringing it fully into the pandemic themes right away.
Well, I mean, that's really I would say the biggest thing that we've all been dealing with as a collective still. We do have some folks that maybe are, trying to move on like it's done. But I think if we have a, more realistic perspective, we still have people that are really dealing with the fallout and the challenges from all of this. As I sit, in a random space with my mask on outside my house, it's right. I'm experiencing that reality very much so right now. But I think that you're definitely right. We are trying to figure out how to move forward. I think, you can even think of this as maybe even the beginning of a harvest from that Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that we had at the winter solstice last year, where we were still trying to kind of figure out what is the new reality that we're going to be asked to, that we're going to be asked to kind of manifest here as a group. And are we going to do the things necessary to take care of one another and do what is best for each other, on some level. And I think that that's probably part of the thing that we see with that conjunction in Aquarius there from Jupiter and Saturn. So moving forward, I just wanted to kind of start there because we're going to go through a progression here of, we've got the first couple days of October We're going to be in that Libra 1 decan. We're going to have a few aspects that we can talk about there, and then we'll move into the second decan, which I think we have a lot to cover in the second decan of Libra, especially with oaths and contracts, which is something that comes up in Austin Coppock's book 36 Faces quite a bit. But let's start off with the first day of Libra here. The first day, well, not the first day of Libra, excuse me, the first day of October. We're starting off with a last quarter moon phase in the beginning of October. And the first aspect that we have is one that we've actually, we're experiencing right now as we speak, or the kind of the separation of it. We've got a Mercury Pluto square that is going to be coming back again on that first day of October. Simultaneously, Mercury is going to be going underneath the beams of the sun that day, which is called its heliacal setting. So Hermes is becoming the psychopomp, going into the underworld, making contact with the lord of the underworld, Pluto, in a difficult aspect. I know that you have some stuff in your chart that speaks to maybe playing a role as a psychopomp. What are some of your thoughts on Hermes in that that journey that he's going on, and what he's trying to help us to accomplish?
Yeah, I have the way in which I have the sort of psychopomp signature in my chart is indeed a Mercury-Pluto connection. So I guess in that sense, this is a combination that I'm intimately familiar with. Though I will say I have that in a conjunction, and I see it playing differently in a square.
Okay.
Even though I don't always feel capable of describing it perfectly, right? However, that's definitely part of it for me, is that need to describe it perfectly, I think, has to do with my Mercury Pluto.
Sure.
So yeah, but as for the psychopomp element here, I think what's interesting is you're describing there's multiple sort of dimensions of shadow and darkness at play. Between the heliacal setting, where Mercury is like, all right, see you later, folks. I'm gonna go ahead and be invisible for a while.
Right.
And then the shadowy nature of Pluto, which I consider an honorary malefic, which is bringing, if not casting a shadow explicitly on the light of Mercury, it's bringing it to shadowy depths. Things that are hidden, or sometimes hidden in plain sight. That's what I find interesting about Pluto. It's almost as if there's like an alien Plutonian realm that we're all living in. And when you have like a Pluto experience or transit or something like that, it's almost like you've been abducted. Maybe you didn't go anywhere, but it's suddenly you can see what was always there through which Pluto was hiding from you.
Well, every once in a while, Hades will erupt from the underworld to kidnap you back down into that awareness, right?
Yeah.
Right.
So, as for, Mercury as the psychopomp, I think is a great image to play with, whether that's kind of plumbing the depths of your own psyche, your own life. There's the turning inward and diving deeper, diving into hidden things. And I don't know, I mean, maybe there's more literal interpretations of this, but I'll leave that to the individual.
Sure.
So those are some starting thoughts.
Yeah, and I agree. I think that when we have contacts with Mercury and Pluto, there's always, I like to think of Pluto as that plunger planet. I used to call it the clogged toilet planet, but I've now shifted to be like, okay, well, this is the actual action that may help us to deal with the things that have been pushed underneath the surface, or that we might not have been aware of, or that have been hidden from our awareness. So I think that with Mercury moving retrograde through the third decan of Libra, we'll talk about this in more depth as we get to that section of the solar time. But third decan Libra really is about making adjustments, being able to find a calm center within a chaotic situation that requires many, many small changes. And, Pluto's hanging out in that third decan of Capricorn, which is generally associated with bureaucratic systems, with things like government, with things like administrative red tape. So I do think that there could be some challenges as far as like, our own, peace and inner peace being disturbed by, some forces greater than ourselves. I know that for me, this experience I'm having today is a combination of that Mercury Pluto square from my third to my sixth, something that was sort of out of my control that came in and swept in and changed, the the rules a little bit. And also the Venus-Uranus opposition happened right on my MC-IC axis, so that's shaking some stuff up a little bit here. But one of the things that I could say just tangibly about this is, like, in our area, there was many power outages, and people are like, well, when is the power going to come back on? And, we're dealing with the red tape of dealing with a large corporation like DTE that, we're at the mercy of. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so that's serving as a Pluto.
Right, that's sort of the Pluto, like
3 force.
Exactly. So it's like, well, how are you going to be able to keep your own sense of balance while you're dealing with potentially some corruption within the system? And the corruption in the system, like, we have here is like, well, maybe there's not enough resources to take care of the trees that made the power lines go down or whatever. But yeah, I think that just on a more type of abstract level, in addition to things like bureaucratic challenges, this could lead to things like, becoming obsessed with a particular idea. I think that sometimes when we see Mercury-Pluto conjunctions or squares or contacts, we really are trying to dive into the depths of something and unearth it and ask really deep and probing questions. So there may be some really deep questions that come up around this beginning of the month, especially around fairness, though, and equality, because the sun is highlighting the things that are out of balance first. I think that that's the thing that we have to understand, is that for us to bring things back into balance, sometimes we have to become aware of where we have an inequality.
Yeah, for sure. And what's coming to mind for me right now, thinking about how this involves, Mercury squaring Pluto, is that Mercury is probably trying to deal with, the details. Mm-hmm. And the details of what is fair and what is just. When you're talking about the third decan of Libra, I mean, I think sort of the narrative there is about, it's like trying to generate, find, and maintain balance amidst chaos, but also basically trying to make balance where there is no balance, or where it's impossible to find balance.
Yeah.
And I think it's a place of tough questions. It is a place I am intimately familiar with, as I have some very important planets there in that decan.
Yeah.
When I first kind of encountered the walkthrough of what this decan means, I felt extremely vindicated and validated, because it felt like it was describing my life. This whole question of, like, how do you stay balanced when you're surrounded by extremes, or you're plunged into situations where there are too many factors, too many realities, and too many truths that you're trying to hold on to, that you can't make simple decisions. Mm-hmm. So the way I think of it is, it's almost like at a certain point you have to choose priorities and acknowledge that everything's not going to work out for everyone and everything's not going to be perfect, right?
Well, yeah, I'm living this moment right now.
Yeah,
there's so many factors that I usually just take for granted, when it comes to doing these like live streams, that, something like a plutonic experience is throwing me completely out of that routine. And like you said, it's like, how do you make the small adjustments to be able to still maintain that functionality, that equilibrium, and things like that as well. And I'm curious in the chat if any of you are going through any similar experiences over the last day or two, where you've been thrown maybe out of your usual routines, and what are some of the things that you've been doing to maintain that peace? And one of the things, Jared, I wanted to highlight is that it's not really about trying to find peace externally. It's more about how can you become centered and balanced, and then be able to bring that to your environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Let me think about that. Yeah, totally. I think that makes total sense.
All right, so that's the first day of October. And we have one more aspect that comes up before the sun sachets into this second decan where we have a lot of action. We just have a sort of a minor aspect here with Venus sextiling Pluto here. So potentially maybe we'll get some assistance from Venus, although Venus is not super excited to be in this area of the zodiac either, right?
Yeah. Tell me what you think about this, but I've been thinking a lot about versions where I don't know what the name is for these modern aspects where there's like inconjunct and other kind of aspects in modern astrology where they are connecting through degree but not through traditional aspects.
Right.
So in this case, I was been thinking about what that means or how that works or what it's all about. And it almost feels like while Mercury and Venus can't aspect each other and kind of can't communicate, which is a real bummer for Mercury because Mercury's in Venus's sign. It's almost like because they're both aspecting Pluto simultaneously, it's like they can communicate, but only through Pluto.
Yeah.
Which is a mixed bag, you know?
Sure.
But it's like, so it's almost like Venus can help Mercury in the sense that Venus is making a sextile, a helpful aspect to Pluto, but it can't go directly to Mercury. So it has to go through has to come in the garb or in the costume of Pluto. Through that square aspect, which are both, close enough at this moment to be in play.
I like that.
The moment we're talking about, not this moment. Right now, we're just living the Mercury-Pluto square as it is.
Well, get ready to revisit it, though. Whatever you're experiencing today, there's probably going to be some version of it coming
and
back
we're not
again.
even retrograde yet.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Oh boy.
We're close enough. I think it's relevant.
That third decan of Scorpio that's the 7 of Cups card. And it's sort of like you're being presented with all these options, all these temptations. I like to think of Scorpio, and this is jumping ahead a little bit, but Scorpio is, since it's that Mars ruled sign, I think of Mars in two forms. The Mars, according to Robert Schmidt of Project Hindsight, is a severing and separating planet. So in Aries, it's severing and separating from the collective to be able to infuse into a body, like in the next sign of Taurus. But in Scorpio, we are severing and separating from the body and returning that body to the earth through decay and returning to a collective. So I think with Venus, we may be having some final desires that are showing us that are maybe keeping us from, attaining that type of unity that we might feel once Venus moves into Sagittarius and the Jupiter ruled sign. That's a little bit different vibe. I really see a lot of the Scorpionic stuff as, I don't know, like releasing old forms, releasing bad habits. I think that's something that really comes up in Austin's book quite a bit is habitual things that we've fallen into that may have, are not really serving their purpose anymore. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So that brings us to the sun in Libra 2, which we're going to be experiencing from October the 2nd to October the 12th. So you can see here, that as we move forward, we're going to have the sun moving into 10 degrees of Libra. That's the second decan, the second 10-degree section right here, getting very close to Mars. That second decan Libra is a Saturn-ruled decan. It's a double Saturn-ruled decan. Austin Coppock calls it 2 links of a chain. It's kind of synchronized with the Three of Swords card, which is a is sort of a. It's not the most fun card in the tarot. If you've seen it, it's like a heart being pierced by three swords with like rain clouds in the background. Um, a lot of Saturn significations that Austin mentions is binding, obligations, distributing suffering. So there's something where we maybe this is the negotiating phase. We realize that there's an imbalance. Now we need to renegotiate the contract. We're going to see a whole mess of action here starting on October the 3rd. Oh man, this is going to be a fun one, isn't it, my friend? Like this period of time is probably some of the most active astrology, I would say, of the year. With many things, many different areas of life just coming at us all at once that are all intertwined.
Yeah.
So the first thing we've got is this Mercury retrograde trining a retrograde Jupiter. So we've got a Four of Swords energy with the third decan of Libra that we've been discussing, and then that Seven of Swords where we're maybe trying to leave the past behind. What do you see with Mercury Jupiter?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because this is one of those aspects that we've already had in the month of September, which was, I believe, concurrent with the full moon in Pisces just a few days ago. I think that's when it went exact.
That's right.
It was on Monday. Now, I don't know what to make of this, but something that I noticed the day of the full moon and the day of this Mercury Jupiter trine was that suddenly the stock market dropped like very dramatically, which I thought was kind of interesting because it's not what I would have guessed if I was thinking about Mercury and Jupiter making a trine. That's a nice aspect. Two planets, one planet associated with markets and one planet associated with wealth. So that just kind of grabbed my attention. It made me really curious about what other sort of things we're going to see when this aspect happens two more times. I think the third one is not till November though.
Right.
What it makes me think about is like I've been thinking about trines lately, and what to make of the sort of impetus that people put on trines, like make the most of this aspect. When this aspect comes, you should do the XYZ. You should try this thing. You should try to get something out of it. And I've been trying to reflect on like what sort of things can you really get out of a trine, and honestly, some of these thoughts are derived from watching your last monthly forecast with Sam Reynolds. Something that he said about. He's talking about inertia, how things that are already in motion will kind of stay in motion. Right. And it made me think about the nature of trines as really reflecting like a sense of momentum. So that things that are already in motion, already in movement, things that are already kind of working are going to work great. However, I don't think you can take a trine and just like magically, well, you can do magic, but I don't know if you can just spontaneously generate some perfect outcome in some area of life where there is no motion as of yet, right?
Sure.
I think they end up reflecting more of what's already working is going to keep working. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. Because with the squares, you get the friction that helps move you forward, right?
Sure, and or reveals problems that you need to resolve.
Right.
So I think I guess part of what I'm saying is that seeing that thing in the news on that day threw me off a little bit. And I'm trying to connect these ideas where there are things in motion on an individual and collective level, and they're going to keep moving. And whether just because it's a trine, maybe they'll be good, or maybe there's just an ease of movement that is reflected by that trine, and maybe not always does it have to be something that we enjoy. Or
well, and I'll tell you what, we're in this day or so, this like last, October 3rd through October 6th, we've got a balsamic moon here, which is also sort of about release, about tying up loose ends. And I think that actually really reflects really well with Jupiter in the third decan of Aquarius, where we're, trying to find a harmonious way to leave the past behind and embrace the unknown. So I would say that that period of time between the third and the sixth is time to, like, come to terms with things, let go of the past, think about what you want to do as far as your new agreements, like maybe reflect on your old agreements that you've had in various areas of your life, because when we hit the sixth, there might be some renegotiation that starts up here. So if we move forward here to the sixth, this is Wednesday, October the 6th. We are going to be seeing a new moon. So here is our new moon here. 13 degrees of Libra, conjoining Mars. Mercury's still in the picture here, retrograde. Oh boy. It's also conjoined to a fixed star called Algorab, which I thought was interesting. We can talk about that in a second, but isn't that cool? Yeah, it's not an interest. It's not the most fun fixed star. For those of you who don't know about Algorab, it's basically in the constellation Corvus, the crow. And that crow was given a sacred task by Apollo to fill this divine cup. And he failed at this task because he was distracted by these like delicious figs or shiny objects or whatnot. And instead of owning up to the failure, he blamed his I don't know, what would you say, his character flaw on the serpent Hydra that he was riding on the back of. So there's some themes of maybe some distractions, eliminating distractions, having integrity within these negotiations. Like with this Libra 2 decan, we really have to make sure that we're trying to create, I would say, win-win situations rather than win-lose situations. And that Algorab story really reminds me of, like, that crow created a win-lose situation where it didn't necessarily have to be the case. You see anything else with this new moon here, my friend?
Yeah, I'm just reflecting on that and everything you just said. That Algorab story, the Algorab story I had never heard before, so I really appreciate that. That's very interesting, because the general associations that I've encountered about the star of Algorab are the concept of an ill wind of gossip and malicious speech, lies, etc.
Right.
So having this new moon, be making such a strong aspect or conjunction to Mars, and to have that fixed star so close by, and to have Mercury retrograde 7 degrees away, gives me a lot of flavors of, malicious speech, and perhaps lies. While we're kind of framing everything in this narrative of negotiation, because of the second decan of Libra and all the themes of, marriage, contracts, bonds, and the like. So
Right.
it makes me think that, whether personally or collectively, there's going to be a strong narrative going on of, taking a look at our contracts, either renegotiating them, breaking them, or just fighting over them. And that this, being a new moon, I think will be probably the beginning of a month-long, story around those themes.
Yeah, the seed.
Yeah, the seed of, not that it's complete, not that it hasn't started any earlier than that, but certainly an important pivot point. And it makes me think about a lot of things that are going on in the world currently, which maybe I can bring up now or maybe I can save. But Um,
Well, we're getting there. We're getting close to the relevance there. I mean, one other thing that's happening on this new moon is Pluto will be stationing direct as well, which, like we were discussing earlier, it's not always as big of a deal since it happens once a year generally. But I think it is interesting that there is some kind of movement within an outer planet, maybe a more collective type planet, as we're seeing this new moon type of energy as well.
yeah, definitely.
So as we are moving forward on the 7th of October, we're going to see a shift. And this shift is basically the ingress of Venus into Sagittarius. So what is Our Lady Venus experiencing here as she moves into the first decan of Sagittarius here?
Well, I would say maybe unfortunately, Venus is experiencing a conjunction to the South Node.
Right. Yes, for sure.
It's not just your typical let's all go party kind of Venus and Sag. Um, so that's a little bit of a, I don't know, I don't want to call it a paradox, but it's a very specific kind of energy or flavor that's happening there. I was thinking about the combination of Venus and K2, the South Node, and had to draw on some notes from class and think about some stuff. And one thing that comes up is taking Venus away from its more sensory or sensual and material form towards something more abstract. So in this case, thinking about Venus as the planet of relationships, I think it really brings Venus more into its sort of abstractified or idealized relational form, as opposed to having a good time Venus.
Sure.
Though Venus and Sag does love to have a good time. So I think particularly given that Venus is in this role of ruling the planets in Libra, which are all concerned with relational dynamics at this moment, it's going to put Venus as the ruler in touch with a more spiritual side as opposed to a more material side. What do you think about?
Yeah, I agree. I think that, you talk about K2 as that severed body of I don't know, celestial dragon or a celestial demon in Eastern astrology. And, you've got this kind of processing energy. Hellenistic astrologers would think of it as a drain where energy was leaving the material realm. Like in evolutionary astrology, they say, oh, the North Node good, South Node bad, but it's not necessarily like that with traditional astrology. They have one as a point of increase and one decrease. And it was actually more fortunate to, align yourself with the South Node in some, forms of astrology. But what I would say is that there's something that is going to be ending that is related to Venus in your chart or in the collective. We do see a dignity improvement from Scorpio to Sagittarius, but again, the nodes are not necessarily like fun places. That's where we get eclipses where, that demon is literally swallowing one of the lights, the sun or the moon, right? So I actually think that my initial thought with this is that we have some enthusiasm, right? First decan Sagittarius is really about speed, movement, enthusiasm, catching, like spreading something. And, with the South Node here, I think it's also about how can we compost an old belief system as well. I think that we have certain belief systems, maybe in our relationships, in our social customs, and how are we going to release that to be able to create the new contract that wants to be born from these, first few days of October, that is going to be pretty powerful. I mean, this is something that, I mean, these are not just temporary cycles we're talking about. We've got a Mars cazimi coming up the next day, which is the complete new beginning of a Mars cycle. So if we move forward one day to October the 8th, we're seeing here at roughly 15 degrees, 14, 15 degrees, the
Yeah,
conjunction of the Sun and Mars, right?
that's right.
And
It's
that is called cazimi.
15 and 6 minutes.
There you go.
I agree with that completely. I think that's really interesting. That sort of like there's a lot of talk in astrology about like release that which no longer serves you. But with the South Node here and Venus making contact with the South Node while ruling over this whole complex in Libra, I do think that you're identifying exactly the right thing, which is letting go of some old dynamics to make room for what needs to happen here, which is, we keep talking about it being a negotiation. I think a rather tense negotiation
Yeah.
with some perhaps harsh words flying around and perhaps very passive aggressive behavior.
Yeah.
What with Mars and Libra.
Indirect, right? Where people aren't willing to just say what is truly on their mind. It's always this kind of circumventing of, a direct expression. Because both of these planets, the Mars and the Sun, this is a house that they're both very uncomfortable in, with the Sun in its fall and Mars in its exile. So they are not being provided with the type of resources that they normally need to be able to do what they like to do best. And in the Sun's case, to be able to create vitality, to be able to shine, to be able to select and create honor and merit and authority. And Mars being able to, I don't know, separate us from the things that are together, or to if you want to flip it around to something positive, the circumstances that Mars presents requires action, courage, the ability to fight for whatever it is that the mistress 2K brings us that isn't so good, right? Mars being the planet of bad fortune. So both of those planets are not they're not feeling tippy top. But I like the story you were telling me about the warrior with this cazimi when we were talking earlier. Can you recount that for us?
Yeah. Well, I will. First, I just want to comment on
Yeah.
what you were saying. I think that a large part of this is because both of these planets are, undignified here. But this process is happening nonetheless. I almost feel like whatever it is, the negotiation and severing of contracts or renegotiation of contracts that we're seeing here is a very reluctant one.
Mm.
It's one that nobody really wants to have, but they have to have.
Right.
So I'm hopeful that maybe the Mars cazimi, you were talking about being indirect with Mars and Libra. Perhaps this would be a moment where finally Mars can be direct, right in the
Mm.
heart of the Sun. Um,
Yeah.
it'll be dependent on the situation, different responses in different situations. But I wonder if there will be breakthrough. Those problems will exist in this time period with a very combust Mars, but maybe there will be some kind of breakthrough and directness. Maybe that just means stating directly what the conflict is or
Mm-hmm.
what the terms are, right? So that there can be some more clear negotiation going forward from there.
Yeah, I like that. And especially because you've got Mercury is going to be doing the same dance with the Sun a day later. One thing I wanted to point out just before we move on from the Mars cazimi, um, I wanted you to recount that story that you were talking about with Austin, because I thought it was a really great way of thinking about when Mars is both going under the beams, coming into conjunction with the Sun, and then emerging, because Mars is going to emerge as a morning star on the 22nd of November at 15 degrees of Scorpio, a really powerful position for Mars. So tell us a little bit more about your thoughts on that, because I thought it was a really eloquent way of thinking about it.
Yeah. So I will now recount in paraphrase what I got from class with Austin a couple years ago. Um,
Sure.
having looked up through my notes out of anxiety because we had to talk about the Mars and other stuff. And what I rediscovered and was sitting with was this kind of image of Mars as a warrior and the full cycle of Mars in its relationship with the sun. First as you're in an office.
I am at my partner's desk. Okay, I think we're good.
I don't know. Spencer lost his power last night.
Yeah. I haven't had power since 5 p.m. last night, and it doesn't seem like it's going to be coming back on for a few days. So I'm displaced right now. And actually, it's funny because my fourth house is Scorpio, so I've got an exiled Venus there opposing Uranus. But continue with your story, fine sir.
Yes. So basic image here was of a warrior who, in his first phase, the quote unquote Oriental phase, as in East, as in Eastern rising, is kind of setting out into the world as a soldier filled with sort of young, perhaps naive energy and enthusiasm, ready to go and fight for whatever cause has been given to this person or this figure, moves out into the world, fighting with this freshness and enthusiasm. Eventually, in the retrograde phase, there's a general idea of, seeing the dark side of war. Not that war is ever not dark, but seeing war gone too far in a way that it really corrupts or in some way kind of, what's the term I'm looking for? Well, basically brings some things to the warrior's consciousness that really trouble them.
Disillusionment, maybe.
Disillusionment, disenchantment. Yeah. That's what I said.
There you go. Yeah.
Which kind of like bring a lot of a grizzled and wizened awareness of the ways of the world and the ways of battle. And then moving forward into the Occidental phase, it's almost like a wise veteran returning home from the war who then, is able to go on some rants about like, well, when I was over there, this is what it was like, and blah, blah, blah. Having a lot of wisdom and a lot of understanding, but also that carrying that disillusionment forward. And then eventually coming back into combustion, and getting close to the sun through a process of purification and burning away those experiences so that Mars can be reborn back into that freshness and enthusiasm. So we're currently, before October even starts, we are in that combustion phase as the sun is. Are we combust yet? I think so.
I think we are. Yeah. I think it was since the end of August, actually.
Yeah. So, as the sun is kind of chasing Mars and catching up, we're currently in that phase of sort of burning away the experiences of the past cycle, the past Mars cycle, which, I was thinking about it. I was thinking about where we were as a society or as a species, last Mars Cazimi, and where we are now and what's all happened. And it's been a really profound, little window of time where we've all lived through a lot, and we've lived through a lot of like very difficult martial experiences. Mars has done a lot. Mars has seen a lot in this cycle that it's been through. So there's a lot to burn away, I have to say.
Boy howdy. I can't, it just feels like a whole different lifetime. Like, what was the last one we had? September 2019, right? Was the last Mars Cazimi.
And it was also very close to Mercury. It was 1 degree away from Mercury at the time.
Well, and what makes me nervous about that is that you have Mercury in a place it likes to be, and Mars in a place that it's like fairly neutral about. But here we have Mars and the Sun in places that they do not like to be, and that gives me some pause for sure.
Yeah, I would say that it's not something that I've looked into deeply, like tracing Mars cycles based on cazimis and what transpires in the intermediary is
Yeah.
not something that I've ever. So I understand absolutely what you're saying. I don't want to strike fear into people's hearts.
No, there's always definitely ways we can deal with whatever we're presented with. That's the beauty of humanity is our adaptability, right? And our ability to make changes, hopefully, when presented with the necessity to do so. Although the last few years have put that into question for me sometimes. But I think we're all doing the best we can.
Yeah.
You, so you had some interesting, collective stories that you were seeing that could be something that we could be experiencing with both this Mars cazimi and then the Mercury cazimi that happens the next day on the 9th at 16 degrees of Libra.
Yeah. So I've been seeing some things kind of brewing in the news, and I've just been kind of paying attention to any story that seems like it's just starting and there's much more to come in the near future, because that stuff kind of drew my attention. And apologies to our international viewers, or should I say listeners, because neither of us is on camera.
Mm.
That the things that are drawing my attention are pretty US centric stories. However, hopefully you can derive from the symbolism some more applicable meaning. So basically, I mean, all the stories that I've noticed that I've been thinking about and reading about all have to do with negotiations, which is what we've been talking about for a while now. There's a few. One is the union, which is called IATSE. Well, it's an acronym. I don't know what those letters stand for, but it is union that represents crew members for TV and film productions.
Mm-hmm.
Has been trying to negotiate the producers union about a number of things. I think it's like the end of their contract has ended or is ending, and they're trying to renegotiate for their next window of time, like maybe it's 3 years or so, a 3-year contract. And they are generally experiencing a lot of burnout, the people that work on film and TV, and trying to deal with a lot of unfair conditions around work hours, low wages, and one of the big ones is having no time to rest.
Right.
So you'll have 16-hour work days, and they'll wrap up at like 2 a.m. and they're like, all right, everybody, see you here at 9 a.m.
Right.
This is kind of taken for granted, and it's been like this for a really long time. But I think a few factors have changed. One is like, now they're doing it in a pandemic. Another thing is there's, with social media, people have been sharing stories, and a lot of people have been recognizing that they're not the only ones living like unreasonable circumstances. The other big thing that's happening is they're negotiating. They get lower pay for work they do for streaming services. So they are trying to have some progress with the producers union to get better treatment around these issues, and they're basically getting nowhere with it. And so it looks like, most likely they are going to go on a strike, which would be a pretty historic thing. I think there hasn't been a strike like that since around World War II.
Wow. So we're going to be separated from our sources of enjoyment and entertainment. Right.
That's amazing, because I thought it was a great symbol of Mars and Libra, because these are the martial characters in a Libran environment of create, arts and entertainment.
Right.
But they are martial because they're the ones doing sort of the backbreaking physical work. I guess that's kind of a Saturnian thing, but there's also kind of an engineering prowess that comes with this area,
Sure.
the crew members. So to me, it feels very Mars. Also, if you've ever been on a film set, the people themselves have a very brusque kind of quality to them. So
Yeah.
there is a strong Mars flavor there, and I just thought that was pretty amazing. with all of the second decan of Libra stuff that's looming and this whole emphasis on contract negotiations. And then there's other ones, there's a lot of stuff going on in the US Congress. We're trying to fund the government, but also trying to raise the debt ceiling simultaneously. And we may be heading for another government shutdown. If not that, we may be heading toward another showdown of brinkmanship over whether to raise the debt ceiling, where it's one of these things where if we don't do it, we will default on our debts. We will send the whole world into total chaos. So
it's fun times.
Very tense negotiations happening there. Also negotiations happening between moderate and progressive Democrats over spending bills. And then another one which I was following is this situation in China where there's a giant housing developer, I guess, who they've taken on so many loans, like tons and tons of loans that they can't pay, and they're basically indebted up to their eyeballs, and they've been shutting down lots of construction projects. Wow. And they're a huge company, and so all these people have been investing in housing and in homes that they're planning to live in, and the homes are not getting built, and it's actually has the possible makings of like a financial crisis because it involves so many, in the Chinese system, because it involves so many other companies. And basically there's another showdown happening there, which is between this company Evergrande and Chinese regulators who, I guess I don't know much about this, but the Chinese government has a lot of leeway to decide how strictly to enforce these kinds of issues with debt. And in the past, they've not enforced things very strictly, but apparently they've been trying to, be more strict about enforcement in order to have a healthier economy. And I guess basically trying to like ease their way out of this housing bubble, which.
Oh, and I think that the key word that you're mentioning that really sparks, second decan Libra stuff is debt as well, because it's like, it's that Saturnian decan. It's not just about an oath. It's about what do you owe someone? What are you bound to, right? And sometimes it's about how are we, being able to, I don't know, fulfill our obligations. Does that make sense? And debt being a big theme with that.
Yeah, definitely.
Go ahead.
I can't think of another time where I've seen so many stories all kind of surrounding the same issues of where there's two parties hitting an impasse like this. And I think amidst this whole story that's happening in Libra, even though it's not aspecting Uranus, it is tying in the Saturn-Uranus square that colored this whole year, which I think is really what, with it being in fixed signs, it's really about like intransigence. Is that the right word? That sounded wrong when I said it.
I don't know. That you got me on that one, my friend.
One of those words that nobody ever actually says out loud.
I'm trying to think of one of those like made up words from The Simpsons that my partner always. That's a perfectly cromulent word to me. Oh man.
I get the vibe, which is digging in the heels, right? Both Uranus and fixed signs digging in their heels. And when Mars finally does become visible, where's it going to be? Oh, right in the thick of that Saturn, Uranus, Mars T-square. So all these negotiations are leading into that next phase.
Yeah, and maybe you've got the gripe that comes to light with Mars conjoining the Sun, and then we've got some kind of negotiation with Mercury conjoining the Sun, and eventually the two of them come together. If you could see on this day, which is the 9th of October, we're going to have a conjunction between Mercury and Mars as well. So I would say that if we're going to see this play out in the collective, you could see this right here with the 16-degree conjunction. Mm-hmm. But I would say also in our personal lives, there's as above, so below, as within, so without, as collective, so personal sometimes. If you find yourself in some kind of tense or heated negotiation, like Lisa is saying in the chat box, it's not necessarily a time for getting ahead at the expense of others. It's a time to explore win-win situations, which isn't easy. And I agree, Lisa. Sometimes Libra season is interesting because it's, being the fall of the sun, being the exile of Mars, it's not a place in the zodiac where you have, completely unfettered agency, right? It's always like there's always some kind of other that you are trying to take into consideration when you're moving about. Would you say that that's true with your Libra placements as well?
Yes, to a fault.
Yeah.
I was going to say my detriment, then I realized that was a loaded word.
You're going to what?
I was going to say to my detriment, but then correct word for this particular moment.
Sure. I think, one other thing that I thought was so funny is when you were sharing, the promo for this, you were talking about how, me being a Leo ascendant, I would carry the visual load because you like to stay anonymous. But it's so funny to me that as the sun moves into its fall, the ruler of my ascendant, here I am invisible. You know what I'm saying?
Like me.
Yeah, exactly. I'm in your territory now. So I guess my point with that is saying that it probably isn't going to be possible to gain this all or nothing type of victory. There is going to have to be some kind of push or pull, and we are going to have to release some of the pent up feelings of wanting to lash out, because really, that passive aggressive energy can really undermine trust between two people. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think that if we want to create an agreement that is sustainable, we are going to have to give up some things. We are going to have to give up some things that we're, maybe very attached to. And that could also be bringing in this Venus conjoining the South Node on that same day, right? You are going to have to give up, maybe even it's a belief system, because this is another thing that I've been thinking about with Libra in particular. It's an air sign, right? So it is very in that kind of idealized realm. This is something my teacher Achyuta Baba says, is that you look at, and you normally think of Virgo as the perfectionist of the zodiac, but in reality he's like, it's probably Libra, or air signs in general, because they're not even dealing with real forms. They're dealing with idealized forms, right? Like platonic forms. And sometimes it's hard because you're going to argue about something that isn't even manifested. And sometimes the hardest thing to let go of is a belief that we have based on what we perceive as perfection. Mm. So be careful that you're not getting attached to just an ideal rather than dealing with some kind of reality. I think that's the key here is you may have to ground this. The principle of the thing may be what we're arguing about around this period of time, right? All right, let's keep moving. On the 10th, you doing all right, my friend?
Yes, doing great.
Good. I really appreciate you being here. I love your insights. I've always enjoyed our chats. You and I have had these long chats just between the two of us for many years, and it's cool to be able to share that with the world.
That's right.
All right. So what we've got going on the 10th is the stationing of Saturn direct. Yeah. So here we see at 6 degrees of Aquarius, the Great Reaper is going to be turning its tanker its tanker around and moving forward again. Thoughts?
Yeah. I feel like I wrote some things down. I'm trying to find them now. So thinking about Saturn is going to be in, or I mean, it already is, but it's in its occidental phase, but now it's going to be in its occidental phase and direct.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think while Saturn has been in Aquarius really dignified this whole time, I think now we're, the earlier phase of Saturn in Aquarius this year, I think was more about sort of building systems, building structure.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a little bit more that word you used, reaper. It's in the reaper phase,
right?
Coming around and delivering consequences a little more, because it's like, okay, we've been through this territory, we've moved back, we've reviewed it, and now we're coming through with the cleanup and picking up all the debris, all the moral and karmic debris, as well as the systemic debris. So it'll be really interesting to see, on a personal level, what kind of things people deal with, whether it's, reaping the benefits or the consequences of their personal choices. And then on a collective level, how we're going to be moving forward with, the implementation and perfecting and of systems that we've put into place, especially right now, because there's been so many sort of dramatic and literal manifestations of that idea.
Right.
And how that will, whether there will be a new sort of round of, shall we say, consequences for our actions at this time.
Yeah, I think so. I think yes. Like, this position for Saturn. Well, in particular, Saturn is a planet that I think is a little bit misunderstood. If we want to put a positive spin on this planet, and sometimes it's hard to do it because the lessons that we have to learn that are Saturnian in nature sometimes feel so painful and cast us into this like shame or fear or guilt type of experience. But I think that ultimately, and this is the planet that is exalted in Libra. So if we're thinking about how do we do Libra the best, right, is we're really trying to restore balance. We're trying to restore right proportion, like the spirit of the third decan of Libra, Nemesis. And sometimes it's through having to deal with the consequences of our action. And I think that Saturn is a planet that restores balance through contraction. But also, I think it is a planet that increases that which is lacking, but takes away that which is excessive. And I think it's both. But what is Saturn doing in that first decan of Aquarius, and why is it so powerful there? I mean, Schmidt likes to call that the planet of exile, the planet of denial. And we're seeing that we're having to distance from one another and like, hover above from that 30,000 foot perspective and say, what is good? What are the rules that we're going to make that are good for the collective, not just for the individual, right? Because, I read in this other book about, I don't know, there's some traditional treatment of the planets where they were talking about Saturn as being kind of the blueprint that the demiurge Zeus or Jupiter was able to beget or create from, right? So maybe we, like you said, we've been renegotiating the blueprint of how we're going to, the agreements that we're going to have as a society to be able to move forward with something that is more, hopefully more just, not just for the select few, but for maybe the people that have been cast aside or cast onto the fringe as well.
Yeah, definitely. There is that, that strong theme of exile in Aquarius in general, in the first decan of Aquarius, and specifically with Saturn, the ruler of Aquarius, being there, um, and those who have been exiled, those who choose to exile themselves, which is something that I've been thinking about a lot.
Yeah.
A lot of people who I think are currently sort of like stepping outside of what is considered normal society. They just can't deal with it. They can't put up with it, and they don't want to be a part of it because society is moving forward right now. You know, we're having, with Saturn in Aquarius and with the sort of global experience we're all dealing with, we're having to make hard decisions and find ways to create balance and create structure that can function.
Yeah.
A lot of people are just like, no, I don't want to.
Right.
And I think that's going to be something that. Sorry if I brought it back to negative territory.
No, it's okay. Yeah. It's a tough time we're going through. There's a lot where we're trying to parse out, you know. And you and I were talking about, you know, conformity versus rebellion, right?
These are
And
really, it's really pretty hard to overemphasize how strongly those themes are present right now on a
yeah,
global level. Conformity versus rebellion, and something that you were saying earlier on the phone, which I have to keep remembering that nobody else heard except for the two of us, was that we're so accustomed to seeing non-conformity as a desirable, valuable, and idealized thing.
mm,
When I say we're so accustomed to feeling that way, it's like that is in a lot of ways a cultural value that we are all ingrained in, you know, and hold, whether through counterculture or, you know, just because it's cool or whatever. You know.
sure. Well, and one of the things I was pointing out is that a lot of the times, being outside of the norm has worked out for people in the New Age community or the occult community or whatever it is. And we're being faced with certain situations where the common sense thing is, to actually get on board so that you can stay alive. So like it's just something we've never experienced before. This is something I talk about with my partner all the time is this situation. You can't use your past experience to be able to figure out how we're going to be able to move forward, because we've never experienced anything quite like this in our lifetime. And that's so hard for people to like really, wrap their heads around. You know what I'm saying?
Even more than that, you can't use your personal experience.
Yes.
You know?
Oh, I love it. I love that.
And this is the detriment of the sun, right? This Saturn Aquarius. It's really the personification of the anti-sun. It's really not about you, you know. That can be about your personal choices, or also like what you choose to believe and how you get your information. It's like, your friend's cousin is not the end all and be all
Right.
of how to make choices here. You really have to expand outward, and you have to, like, I like what you said earlier about that really high bird's eye view. We all really need to adopt that bird's eye view in order to navigate the situation, not just to stay alive, not just for ourselves, but for everyone and for the greatest number of people, right? And I don't know, it'll be really interesting to see what, like, how significant of an effect it has for Saturn to go direct. I'm sure there will be plenty, but it's not like those themes have disappeared while it's been retrograde, right?
Sure, exactly.
I want to overemphasize like the Grim Reaper's coming. For case numbers and deaths might be falling at this point, based on current trends. I think right now, at least in the US, like the number of deaths is trailing. The number of cases is dropping. The number of deaths is still increasing. So this might be the peak currently. Who knows? I don't want to.
And it's not just pandemic too. I think when we're talking about collective, I think that the elephant in the room that is I don't know if it's not that people aren't talking about it, but I don't know why it isn't becoming more a priority. But if we're going to survive the changes that are going to be coming with our climate, right, with this Earth that we all share, where our own individual decisions do affect somebody on the other side of the planet. That's something that's really come into stark awareness for me in the recent times. Not that it wasn't always on my mind, but it just feels like all of that is accelerating to a little bit of a fever pitch lately. What do you feel about that part of it?
Yeah, for sure. And also, I think to not, I think to not perceive that in 2021 requires willful ignorance.
Ooh. Can I piggyback off that for a second? Because there's a book that I love called A Tiny Universe by Joy Usher that I've been kind of, I don't know, I've been singing the praises of here. And she talks about Saturn in Aquarius in particular as, sort of the glass ceiling, which is really about the limitations of an idea and Saturn attempting to control the narrative through what information, not that they give, but from the information that they leave out, right? So like funneling what you actually hear or not hearing. And I feel like we've really seen that recently with like people basically like putting their head completely under the sand and saying, well, I'm not even going to pay attention to that part of the story that doesn't fit with my ideal, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Fascinating stuff. Okay. Let's keep on rocking here. Looking over in the chat box here, we've got some very nice comments. A couple people that were joining us late. We've got William here from Baltimore. Jody is here from Florida. Angela is coming from Paris. After school kill time. It's talking about the Nicki Minaj situation that's playing out. EY has been going back to the root of what they love, what centers them, and what is thrown off balance in the first place. Words. Okay, yes, I agree.
Very Pluto comment, I remember.
Yeah, Tarya is here from Helsinki, Finland. We've got our Finland crew with us. Astro Yogi Amanda is here. Nice to see all of you. So I'm very glad that you're all joining us today. I'm talking with Mercurius George, an old friend of mine. We're talking the Saturn in Aquarius and Libra season, and we're going to be moving on now to the Sun's journey through the third decan of Libra. And this is happening on roughly October the 12th. You can see that the Sun is going to be moving into the last 10 degrees right here of Libra. And I just want to give you a little bit of some details about the third decan of Libra. Shameless plug before I do that is I will be teaching an entire webinar on the decans of Libra on October the 9th. That's a Saturday at 1 p.m. There is still an early bird special that I extended to October 1st because there was some challenge with the discount code or something. So if you tried to put the discount code in and it didn't work, try again. And you can get 20% off up until the 1st of October. So shameless plug done. Find a link in the description of the video if you want to join me for a deep dive. But this third decan of Libra, it's called the gyroscope in 36 faces. It's a Jupiter-Mercury ruled decan if we look at the two different rulerships. And I think that the key with this one, and Jared, you've lived this decan with some of the placements that you have in your chart. So you have firsthand experience, and I'm going to toss it back to you in a second, but just some things that come up are the daimon or spirit is Nemesis, and we talked about Nemesis a little bit earlier about the goddess that people prayed to restore balance, to restore right proportion, to bring things back into equilibrium if they had been wronged or if there was an injustice. Austin talks a lot about the eye of the storm, staying centered, like multiple little adjustments that you have to make to be able to be peaceful. And that Four of Swords card shows a figure that is laying in repose, while there's some kind of conflict potentially going on around him. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there's some really interesting fixed stars in this decan too. Spica is at 24 degrees, along with a little bit further along Arcturus. And Spica is very fortunate. And Arcturus talks about being more of a pathfinder and like switching from like a hunter-gatherer type of society to one that is more agricultural, kind of the journey of domestication on some level. So tell me more about your experience with Libra 3, my friend. How has this played out in your life? And are there any poignant experiences where you've had to tap into this type of energy to bring about equilibrium in your life?
Yeah.
That's a big question.
Yeah, I mean, just my whole life. For those who don't know, I have this. We can't see your video, so I don't know what just happened there. But I feel.
Are we still there?
Oh, we're still there.
We good?
Did you maintain your equilibrium?
I don't know. I'm trying to maintain it in this strange circumstance that I'm in here. Can everybody see and hear us?
Well, they can't see, but they can hear us.
Okay, I'm going to stop share. I'm going to share again. How about this? Can you see now?
All right. When I said that, I meant they can't see our faces. I was just making a joke.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You're freaking me out.
I just heard a very crazy noise. I think we're good.
Okay.
It sounded like something fell, like a piano fell on your head from the ceiling, but
no, I just hit my computer weird. My whole setup is weird here. But yeah.
So that's what my life kind of feels like. No, but yeah, I think this whole concept of maintaining your equilibrium amidst, a number of confounding and challenging experiences, which really are often sort of, circumstances, the exceptions which prove the rule, kind of. That may have made zero sense, but I'm gonna roll with it.
Sure.
I think it's like what I think about is how a lot of the older imagery for this decan shows people engaged in wild excess, often to the point of violence or depravity.
Yeah.
Which, if you combine that, as with a lot of the decans and a lot of the imagery, you'll have seemingly conflicting imagery, but if you put them together, it kind of creates the whole picture. So if you take this idea of, somebody engaged in some sort of like orgiastic nightmare, put that side by side with the Four of Swords, which is this knight lying on stone or something in like a cathedral in a state of meditation.
Mm-hmm.
The way I see it, it's like that knight is, if you could see inside his mind why he is in that state of meditation, it's to cope with an internal state which is pulling him into extremes. Whether those are his own thoughts and feelings or just the circumstances of his existence or of his life. And so I think of Libra 3 as being like, if we view the progression of this question of justice, in the first decan, we have the kind of call to arms, call to action, it's the announcement of injustice. And then the second decan is like a place of contracts and negotiations and marriage. So creating bonds, ideally rooted in some kind of more just circumstances, more equitable, dynamics. The third decan is sort of like the things fall apart decan. It's sort of like, ultimately that state is inevitably temporary, right? There is no permanence to any of these bonds that we make. And so there's, I think what you're called to do in the third decan is to acknowledge sort of the transience of really all forms of justice and equality and equity, which always have to be renegotiated, always have to be reapproached, no matter what, right? So when you're in the third decan of Libra, you're kind of face to face with that reality, consistently or constantly. I mean, if it's in your birth chart, like with mine, right? So
Yeah.
I feel like my life or my mind presents those realities to me on a consistent basis. I think
Mm.
transit, it will be emerging, right? It'll be coming to the forefront or coming to our minds collectively, or in our personal lives.
Yeah.
Some of those, um, yeah. Does that make sense?
Totally. And I think that one thing that came up when you were describing that is that I think people mistake what one big mistake people have with Libra is that these folks are automatically like always balanced or always peaceful. Like I think if you actually look at a scale, it's always moving, right? It's always kind of readjusting on some level,
Yeah.
and there is going to be extreme swings. And you were talking about the work of bringing things back into that equal place. And I really think that this is about that constancy of it. Like you said, that it's not just we've signed the contract and it's over. That's not what a marriage is. When you get married, it's not like, oh, now we're married, now it's perfect. That's what Hollywood would have you believe sometimes. But you get married and then it's these constant negotiations and renegotiations about what each other's responsibilities are, both to each other and to the relationship and to reality. And it's that's why they say it's work, right? It's not just like happily ever after all the time. If any type of relationship requires that ability to constantly monitor if it's still working. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and to find some kind of peace despite the chaos,
Right.
which
Right.
eventually you have to do, otherwise you'll go nuts.
Yeah. Yeah. Accepting someone for who they are rather than what they are not. Right. Okay. So on the 13th, we're going to start out with we're having another lunar phase here with the first quarter moon. So first quarter moons generally are some kind of physical crisis point where we're trying to manifest something into being. And here, I got to say, this one looks a little bit funky again because we got the moon in its exile along with, squaring the sun in its fall. So again, many of the themes that we talked about with Mercury and Pluto earlier, with third decan Libra and third decan Capricorn, I think are going to come to the fore again with this first quarter moon, like some kind of bureaucratic challenge that could potentially, that needs that readjustment. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And then on that same day, we've got a Venus Saturn sextile. What do you think about that little sextile there in this first quarter moon?
Well, for all the talk about contracts, we've been talking about contracts constantly in this conversation.
Yeah.
I think a sextile between Venus and Saturn may not dominate the universe.
Mhm.
It is helpful for anything involving contracts, anything involving, making a decision and making an agreement between two parties. Because a contract is very much a Venus meets Saturn kind of object. And a sextile is a nice little aspect. Also, I
Yeah.
think it's interesting that Venus is making constant sextiles all month.
Right. Well, and didn't they say in the Thema Mundi that the sextile is of the nature of Venus, since the relationship of Venus to the Sun in that Thema Mundi is that sextile type of relationship with the Sun in Cancer sextiling Venus in Taurus,
Yeah.
and you've got I think the Moon sextiling. Maybe I got backwards. Sorry, the Sun in Leo sextiling Venus in Libra, and the Moon in Cancer sextiling Venus in Taurus. Sorry. So yeah, how do you see sextiles as being different from trines? What are your thoughts on that?
The thing I've always encountered is that it's more like they're there, but they're optional.
Mm-hmm.
like, whereas like a trine is really acting upon you or acting upon the world in some way. Sextiles are more like a helpful energy that you can lean into.
Yeah.
I'm not even 100% sure that I like agree with that. Not because I disagree. I'm just kind of I'm still pondering.
One thing that it came up in some of my studies with Achyuta was he talks about the trine being the nature of Jupiter, and that got me thinking to the difference between Jupiter and Venus, good fortune, I guess. And the way that I've kind of settled on with that is that, because Jupiter is of the day sect, I think the good that we receive from Jupiter is most often the result of the actions that we've taken that can bring us honor, whereas the Venusian good fortune is more about what we've opened ourselves to receive, because it is of the nocturnal sect and it's related to the moon and fortune. So maybe potentially there is help that we receive rather than we pursue with the sextile versus the trine. There was just maybe a little, I don't know, something a little nuance perhaps.
I like it.
Yeah, we'll roll with it, right?
Well,
Okay, so we've got the 13th, and I'm going to move forward to the 15th, where we have the aforementioned trine aspect playing out with the Sun and Jupiter. There it is.
yeah.
I like that. So that's what, Friday the 15th?
Yeah.
Okay. Also, Sun's near Spica. That is a very fortunate fixed star. It's a little bit early for Spica. It's a couple degrees away, but Spica's pretty bright, so I actually think we probably still feel this a little bit.
Spica is like the very end of, it's like 23. It's like nearly 24 degrees, right?
Yep, you got it. Thoughts on this this beautiful trine between the Sun and Jupiter here?
Yeah, what do I think about this? I think that, well, it's interesting because Jupiter is about to station direct at this point, right? It's
It's close, within a day or two.
Yeah, it's pretty noteworthy. And I guess I'm thinking about Sun and fall as a symbol of authority,
Mm-hmm.
or the Sun as a symbol of authority, and being in its fall, being, not at its best, not
Sure.
most authoritative. So I wonder if this will be a moment where, those who are solar in position, leaders, authorities, sort of the archetypal king, will be getting some assistance
Yeah.
from Jupiter. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Like the fallen king, like saying, "All right, Jupiter." Zeus is coming along. He's like, "All right, buddy," lending him a hand, right? And I also think of, whenever I see the Sun, I think of the concept of awareness and just things that are coming into conscious thought rather than that are I don't know, behind the scenes. So I think that, all the things we've been talking about with Libra 3 about making the right adjustments, maybe at this point we come into awareness of what is necessary to create, the good fortune that Jupiter is asking us to do by moving on, right? So maybe it's the right adjustments to move forward and take a leap into the unknown that will lead to honor and merit. Like the story I keep telling with this Jupiter is like were you familiar with the Olympics at all? Did you watch any of the Olympics this summer?
I didn't watch any Olympics this summer, but I knew it was happening.
Yeah. Well, the big thing I can say with that is that Simone Biles, like a gymnast,
Right.
she was having some challenges with her mental health when she was competing, and she decided to withdraw. and to stop competing. And eventually she competed again, but she was honored for that decision. You know, like it's the opposite of the Leo decan where you stand and fight. So I think that really the actions that we take right now that will lead to honor, merit, good fortune have to do with leaving the past behind. It's not necessarily about standing our ground on some issue. It's about saying, okay, what's best for everyone so that we can, like, you know, move forward. I see that coming to a head at this period of time.
Were you drawing on Jupiter's placement right now and like
Yeah. The Seven of Swords decan, right?
Aquarius 3?
Aquarius 3.
Was
Exactly.
the moment when the sun was in Leo, like in late Leo?
It was. You're right. There was an opposition between the Sun in Leo 3 and the Jupiter decan. Yep.
Yeah, got it.
Yeah, perfect example because you know you had people that were competing, and I've told this story on the show before, but it was a really interesting moment for myself because my rising sign is third decan Leo, and I've admitted that my first reaction to hearing that story was I was disappointed that she didn't compete. But after learning more about her situation and about the reality of the situation, I had a newfound respect for it. You know, but it was so different than what, you know, I perceived how I've normally approached things. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And that tension between those two. But again, we're at a completely different phase of all this now. Where now we're working together to find those types of solutions that will lead us forward as a group. Okay, so the 16th of October the 16th, we are going to see another sextile with Venus and Mercury retrograde. So a little minor aspect here between Mercury and Venus. So maybe some positive communications that come up. We've got,
because this is Mercury at its station degree, right?
right.
Having been retrograde for a while, and now finally it makes this contact with its ruler, having been in Libra for quite some time.
Maybe this is a breakthrough moment with the trine with the Sun and the sextile with Venus and Mercury.
Yeah, and I think it's also just nice that like Mercury, the whole while that, you know, we're not even in the Mercury retrograde yet, but the whole while that we are going to be in it, it's nice that we're heading toward this. This will be the chart when Mercury is finally stationing direct. It's going to get this little what is it called? Like I want to say alley-oop.
Yeah.
Yes.
I love it. So there can be a slam dunk, like yeah.
Yeah, this will be Mercury's freeze frame mid slam dunk as it's stationary in the sky.
Ooh, I like that. The poster moment, right?
I don't know if it's true, but I still like it.
Yeah, I think that's the beauty of doing this exercise, right? Is knowing that all the things we've talked about for the last hour and change are some difficult things. Like there's no beating around the bush that the first few weeks of October are probably going to be some of the most challenging of the year. But since we know that that's temporary and that it does ultimately have a resolution, I think that's one of the things that can help us to maintain both our sense of hope, our sense of balance and inner peace, knowing that this moment will come. We just have to get through to the other side, right?
Yeah. And it's like a moment of, it's a lot of, I think it's just a lot of tension, and it's a bit of a standoff, right?
Yeah.
That we have to get through. And we will get through that. We will then head into other stormy weather. But that's for your next episode. So
yeah, sure. Lisa's saying, I wonder if an important leader will step down for the good of all. That's interesting, Lisa. I maybe. I don't know if there's a leader out there who is
willing
having. What's that?
that I don't know if there's a leader out there who is willing to step down, but
We'll see. You never know. We'll keep our eyes on that, Lisa, because that could be one manifestation of this energy. I think that is definitely a good way of thinking about and extrapolating and using your archetypal imagination to figure out what this could mean. And that's a lot of what we do as astrologers is we see the symbols and then we try to make connections with the way that it could possibly play out within our personal and collective lives. All right, let's move forward to the 17th. Excuse me while I answer the phone here for a minute. No, straight to voicemail. October the 17th. Sorry, folks, I'm pulling double duty at Tanya's work today. Well, she's actually out at the farmer's market. She helps run a farmer's market here in our local area. And I'm in her office using her electricity today because we don't have any electricity at our house. So thank you for your patience, everybody out there, and Jared for your going on the journey with us. All right. So on the 17th of October, there is a sticky thing, a sticky icky, with the square between the Sun and Pluto. Now, Lisa was just talking about someone stepping down. Whew. I mean, I don't know if it'll be like voluntary if that's the case with this Pluto aspect, right?
I didn't think of it, but now that you say it, this does have scandal vibes.
Yeah. Because we've got. Go ahead.
Happens twice a year.
Mm-hmm.
So it's in that sense, it's somewhat routine. You're always going to have Sun square Pluto at some point during the year. But you know what else is routine? Scandals. So
sure.
That doesn't mean anything. As in that doesn't negate that meaning.
Yeah, I think, whenever we see contacts with the Sun and Pluto, if you combine the Sun representing authority figures, representing, awareness of things, sometimes we get into an awareness of the corruption that's been happening in the areas that both of those planets are moving through. And here again, we have that Pluto in that third decan of Capricorn, potentially with bureaucratic systems that we're a part of. It's also associated with the throne of power. So, anybody who is sitting on some kind of throne of power could be exposed as some kind of having some kind of corruption that has been repressed into darkness for a period of time. But again, I like the fact that the Sun, even though it's not ideal for the Sun, we're still seeing the opportunity to make adjustments to react to the corruption that is coming to light, right? So I think that this might be, even whatever comes up, power struggle, whatever. I know I've seen with this combination literal like abductions in the news, because that's a very Plutonic story, is Hades erupting from the underworld to abduct a young maiden or something of that nature. I remember a few years ago that like in Portland, where they were like having unmarked vehicles abducting protesters in Portland, and that was during a Sun-Pluto opposition.
Wow.
And so I'm curious to see if things like that potentially erupt from the underworld as well.
The other thing that crosses my mind is that I'm jumping ahead ever so slightly, but I think it makes sense. We have the Sun basically at this point arriving at the degree where Mercury stationed retrograde.
Right.
Mercury was just slightly past the square to Pluto at the time. And we have Mercury just basically arriving at its degree where it's going to station direct. So I also feel like we have the Sun here kind of shining some light on this area of the zodiac, in this area of the world where Mercury first kind of planted its flag.
Yeah.
I wonder if there are some things happening behind the scenes that we're not aware of yet, that will come to light, that will kind of call back to late September.
Well, we're not even to that new moon yet, right? Like as we record this, we're kind of throwing punches in the dark as far as like that goes. But you
Yeah.
know, but you're right. I think that whenever a planet comes to the similar point where there was another planet doing something important, similar themes can come back around again. And I think that the difference between a retrograde Mercury at that degree and the Sun is that Mercury is going to be casting things into doubt, whereas the Sun is probably more about shining light of awareness on something. Rather, this is interesting about Mercury. Mercury is actually the son of both Zeus and Maya, which is a stand-in for the night. So each of the signs, Virgo and Gemini, come before the sun loses power and the night begins to increase. Does that make sense?
In the solar year.
In the solar year, yes, that's correct. So like you've got Gemini right before the solstice where the peak moment of the sun, and the sun begins to descend in the sky and the night begins to increase. And then you've got Virgo directly before, the fall equinox where the night starts to take over and gain more power and increase as well.
To our Southern Hemisphere listeners.
True.
See you.
True. That's always stumped me. I don't have a great answer for our Australian friends or whatever, except for the fact that we're dealing both in a system that was created in the Northern Hemisphere and also something that is archetypal in nature. That's the best that I've got with that. Have you thought about this at all, Jared?
Thought about a lot. I've heard a few takes that handle it well. I'm not always. I don't know if I'm good enough to generate one myself. Although I do think it's interesting that, generally speaking, the way that the seasons are experienced in the Southern Hemisphere doesn't really. It's not just a reverse we experience in the Northern Hemisphere. It's a little more complex. A lot of places will just have the rainy season versus the dry season or something like that.
Right.
I think a lot of our ideas about the seasons are really rooted in, Europe and the Americas, or really just the Northern Hemisphere in general, which has a more sort of standard experience of like summer, spring, fall, winter, etc. So I don't even think it's a question of reversing it. I think it would be a more complicated or nuanced task to make sense of grafting the seasonal, narrative onto the zodiac in the Southern Hemisphere. But
yeah, I don't know if we're gonna solve that today, though, right? We've got some good comments coming in. Prudence says that an Alberta premier is being pressured to resign right now. So there's, this is kind of a, this is, yeah, we got the signal from the universe that was important with, the phone, God's phone is ringing right now or something. Sorry. And then EY is saying, what's Libra without scandal? And both Libra and scandal were capitalized. They say not Libra. And then EY goes on to say, I don't know why I capitalized scandal, but I'm aggressively here for it the longer I stare at it. Yes. Right? Okay.
Very Washington on the mind. That's why
yeah. What's that? Sorry.
A joke about the show called Scandal.
Oh, yeah. There you go. Okay. So we've got the Sun square Pluto. Just be careful of, whatever comes up. Make sure you maintain your integrity, that you're not tempted to abuse power around this period of time. I think that's something in the personal that we may be tempted to do, is because there's some corrupt element that comes out, we may be tempted to I don't know, not be tapping into our higher self and using maybe some kind of base technique to get past it. So I would resist that. If we move forward to the 18th, this seems to be sort of the pinnacle of this 2-week period that we were experiencing where we had a ton of activity. So a number of things are happening on October the 18th, which is a Monday. We are going to see two planets stationing direct on this day, both Jupiter stationing direct at 22 degrees of Aquarius and Mercury stationing direct at 10 degrees Libra. Mercury will also be making its heliacal rise at 10 degrees, which means it becomes visible again. So you could see here in our chart that Mercury will be moving outside of that 15-degree place of invisibility in a condition called phasis. And phasis is something, an omen that is speaking. So something that is speaking much louder. So some messages that we receive are going to be important on this day, potentially through resolution of those contractual negotiations. The other thing we're seeing is a Mars-Jupiter trine at 22 degrees of Libra and Aquarius, respectively. So what do you think here? We're also building to a full moon in the upcoming days as well. What do you make of all this moment?
Yeah, it's a big one. Something that I thought about, which may or may not be, important, is I find it interesting that both Mercury and Jupiter are going direct on the same day, especially this year, given that we've been having all of these eclipses in Gemini and Sagittarius. So in a lot of ways, I think that Mercury and Jupiter have been sort of like kind of, what am I saying? They have been really sort of influencing our world and changing our worldviews and our lives and experiences. We've been really like going through the ringer of Mercury Jupiter themes collectively. Sure. About what is true and how information is distributed and the like. So I don't know, that just calls my attention. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, because you're talking about the hosts of the nodes, right?
That's great. That's a better way to put it.
Right. So we've got the north node in Gemini being hosted by this Mercury down here, and the south node in Sagittarius being hosted by Jupiter. So, we've been asked to have an increase in our ability to see ambiguity, to ask questions, to see nuance, to be able to communicate from multiple or a multivalent perspective. Mm-hmm. And we're being asked to reduce maybe this kind of Jupiterian all-knowing type of attitude, right? Where it's like, oh, I know this and I'm not going to question this. I just have faith in this complete ideal or whatnot. And with Jupiter in the last decan of Aquarius, we're going to have to let go of some old beliefs. This is, I think, the most difficult thing for a lot of people during these last 2 years is that they've done something a certain way their entire life. And they've had it so ingrained that that's just the way life is. And this has just been such an experience that has shaken us out of just complacency, but also shaken us out of our routines in a way that is just, I don't know if we're ever going to go back, quote unquote, to the before this time, right? There's a reason that people were talking about that moment with the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction and air signs for the first time in a couple hundred years. The reason people were talking about that with such interest is it really is a completely different mindset for humanity. And I think we're still just trying to make sense of it. I think that's the phase we're in. We're just like, what does this mean? What does this mean for how we get along as a species, right? Yeah.
I gotta say, I really like how you framed the passage of the nodes through those two signs respectively. That really, it was such a perfect and clear application of somewhat simple ideas, but which I hadn't quite put together like that. Yeah. And I think especially with these planets stationing, like a big part of it is like they're just like, look at me, like
Yeah.
just like, I'm here and I'm staying here for a minute. I'm drawing your attention. I'm drawing your attention to this area, to these topics. And so it just feels like whatever comes about with those stations, whether there are really strong events at that time or not, that seems like an important turning point in what's been a story around the tension between Jupiter and Mercury that's been going on all year.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's going to be highlighted by the fact that we're going to be coming to a full moon. Something is coming to fruition, the fruiting phase, right? So we've got this full moon on October the 20th at 27 degrees of Aries. The moon is going to be opposite the 27-degree sun in Libra. So, yeah, we've got a newly direct Jupiter, a newly direct Mercury. Saturn and Jupiter are both direct. Pluto is direct. The only planet that's still retrograde in the sky here, two planets, are the outer ones of Neptune and Uranus. So all of the things that we've been feeling as far as maybe feeling stuck, this is a period of time where we might be starting to feel like the motion, the wheels are starting to spin again, right?
Yeah, definitely.
And go ahead.
It's like the moon is ruled by Mars, very combust and in detriment, but newly off its cazimi and newly off a trine to Jupiter.
Mm-hmm.
So this Mars is just so interesting and complicated.
Yeah. And Mars is on Spica here too.
True.
Which is interesting. I'm trying to figure out how Mars would use Spica energy, right? Versus like something like Venus.
Yeah.
Help me out there. What do you think?
Well, one of the things with Spica is, which I usually call Spica, but I'm adopting your pronouns.
Okay.
No, I think yours is fine because it is actually referring to a spike, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the meanings of Spica has to do with like design, if that makes sense. I'm kind of failing to gather my words here, but there's this aspect of how things are put together, how things are designed on a sort of grander scale, and I guess Spica kind of grants, as somebody with a big Spica influence in my chart, I'm really failing to have the design.
Well, the things that come into mind with Spica are, it is in the wheat that is in the hands of Demeter in the constellation of Virgo, or Estrella, or however you want to think of that goddess. It's the culmination point of the harvest cycle. It's like the gift that you receive after all the hard work, right? They also called it Stella Maris, which was a star that was offering protection to sailors, like because it was some kind of fixed point in the sky that they were able to navigate towards. So the combination of those two things, and about being able to figure out, all right, what have we gained from this, right? What have we learned? What are we harvesting? And how do we, like you say, how do we organize it? How do we put it into practical use? How do we put it into, integrate it into the system that we have, right?
Yeah. Thank you for there. I guess where I was toward some.
Yeah, no worries.
Problem solving, but
sure,
in this larger sort of perspective of making something beautiful.
Absolutely. The other thing I wanted to point out with this full moon is, this decan of Aries is really about winning over a hostile crowd. They talk about, I believe it was called, oh man, help me out here. Do you remember what the third decan of Aries was called in 36 Faces?
tell you in 1 second.
Burning rose, right? Burning rose.
A rose aflame.
There you go, a rose of flame. Yeah, burning like so this kind of like getting passion, right? But I think he compared it to like a stand-up comedian, right? That is being heckled, and through his humor, through his charisma, he's able to create buy-in on some level. So I think that there may be part of that is as we go through these negotiations, this push-pull, this like win-win situation, there may be a point where we have to use our charisma or use our humor or use some of that to like, get to the finish line, right? To get over the hump to finally move forward. And it is going to be squared Pluto, so don't expect it to be completely easy. Some of those bureaucratic corruption issues may be present also. But
Yeah.
we'll do a whole live stream on that around that period of time. So stay tuned. I'll keep you all updated around that time. So we've done the full moon. On the 22nd, we're heading around the bend here. You doing good, Jared? You good?
I am doing good. Yeah.
Okay, we're heading around the bend here. Thanks everyone for sticking with us. I know these monthlies are marathon sessions, but I really appreciate all of you being here. And yeah, we're heading around the final turn here. So on the 22nd of October, we're going to see a square between Mars and Pluto. So again, we're seeing all of these planets take turns going through the square to Pluto, right? It was Mercury, it was Mars, it's the Sun, but now Mars takes its turn. Oof, what do you got for us on this?
Well, I'm just kind of still reaching for or trying to ponder what Mars is going to be going through, or what Mars is going to be like in this time period, because it feels very complicated with Mars and Mars combust. Me having this meeting with Mercury earlier, having that trine to Jupiter. There's a lot going on, and I feel like one thing I want to say is this whole kind of narrative that we've been kind of centering as our monthly theme about negotiations.
Mm-hmm.
I think it would be unwise to think that it's going to be resolved all that quickly. I don't think this is something like any of these topics where those are happening in someone's personal life or in the collective sphere. I don't think they're all just going to kind of like get worked out on the Kazemi, right?
Sure.
That's going to be a moment of clarity and breakthrough, and then we're going to, then Mars is right back into combustion and a total lack of clarity.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
Mercury has been retrograde up until just a few days earlier. Like, we're still very much in the murky area with all of this stuff, but there's been movement at this point. So
Right.
I think within these stories, again, whether personally or collectively, there's going to be a lot of different little ebbs and flows, a lot of moments of some assistance here, and then like a total unexpected clusterfuck here. And so
yeah,
story, it's helpful for me to frame it in that larger story.
yeah.
Mars is going to be having a quote unquote clusterfuck moment in this square to Pluto, and probably a confounding challenge. The question then being, who is Mars in the scenario, or what is? I'm thinking about, for instance, what I brought up earlier with the, what I imagine is going to be a pretty drawn out negotiation between the IATSE, the TV and film crew union, and the producers, coming up against some kind of really corrupt, under kind of like the underworld of the film industry represented by Pluto, and then them having to really deal with that maybe at this moment. It's as just one part of this whole story.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a million stories like that.
Yeah, I was doing some backlog homework with this to see what happened the last time Mars squared Pluto from this particular degree, and I had to go back to 2019. So it was November 4th, 2019, and this was the day that Trump had to turn over his tax returns to some authority figure because of his tax evasion or whatnot. And personally, I was looking in my journals. One thing I highly recommend for everyone out there who's learning astrology: keep a daily journal and write some of the aspects that you're experiencing on the margins. I do that every day, and so I can go back and look for where that aspect was and see exactly what I was experiencing. So I had, you know how I've been talking about Pluto as the plunger on the clogged toilet? Well, my house had a clogged drain in the basement. Like there was shit all over the basement. Anyway, literally I had like a plumber come out and unclog and destroy a bunch of tree roots that had clogged up the whole house drain, right? And crazy, right?
That was when Mars was around this degree in Libra.
Similar degree, yeah. It was about 20 degrees Libra and 20 degrees Capricorn, but close enough in the same decan that we may see some similar stuff. I also had my attic was getting cleaned out, and it was very disruptive, and it was weird, and I had some conflicts in my teaching work where I was experiencing some real challenges with some of the students I was working with I used to teach music classes, and there were some personality conflicts that I had to navigate gracefully to not create a bigger issue. And yep. I was looking at my journal. I was like, I think I passed the test, but yeah, it was not fun. And it was something where I had to maintain my inner equilibrium when I was faced with a kind of I don't know, maybe almost like a violent challenge.
Yeah.
And yeah, so something to think about.
Yeah. Well, I think the example of the tax returns I find interesting because it's really a fight. In this case, it was a fight to uncover this hidden piece of information related to power and corruption, which I think has really been the clear theme of Pluto in Capricorn 3. Mm-hmm. Really uncovering profound and profoundly disturbing ingrained power and monetary corruption and the like. And so there's probably a fight.
Yeah.
Probably a fight that needs to be had here. And I think that if I had to make a prediction, I bet that theme will return. That specific narrative will return around this time. Maybe not publicly, but if not publicly, then behind the scenes.
Because and have we had a resolution of that?
And I think that the next chapter is coming. Not the next full chapter. I think is not coming in October, but I think it is coming in November.
Yeah.
The next, which is to say, the next round of indictments.
Yeah. Yeah. So well, keep your eyes peeled.
Some developments in that story leading to the whatever comes in November.
Indeed. Okay, we've got some comments in the chat box here. So EY is saying, we are making this an absolute treat. Thank you, EY. We appreciate you being here with us. D says, these marathon sessions are what we want, exclamation point, yay. Okay. And Tarya is saying, what a marathon this October is going to be. I agree. And then Lisa is commenting that for some reason, I was thinking about people who are thrown into the volcano as a sacrifice. The people demanded it. Also, the story of Jesus before Pilate, and the crowd yelled, crucify him. Yeah, that could be. Demanding blood, right? Demanding sacrifice. Definitely volcanic themes with Pluto, for sure. And Mars kind of exacerbating maybe the more violent fighting side of it, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So that gets us through the end of Libra season, I think, unless you've got anything else on Libra season. We're going to head into Scorpio season here. I think everybody is gonna feel a little bit of relief seeing the sun move out of Libra. At least I think I probably will. Libra season's always hard for me. I'm a Cancer Sun and Mercury, and I always have some of the most challenging times of my life around Libra season. And being a Leo ascendant, it's like double whammy because that's my the ruler of my first house. So I will welcome Scorpio season.
Yeah.
What's that?
You mean
Nothing against the Libra folks out there. Like you all are wonderful.
ascendant ruler goes into fall, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I think
So,
the biggest source of relief here when the sun moves into Scorpio will be that sign boundary between the sun and Mars.
yeah,
Just
yes.
just give us a moment where the sun and Mars don't have to hang out and we don't have to be concerned with, conflict and tension at all times.
I'm into it. I'm into that. Just getting them away from the negotiating table for a period of time, right? Just saying, okay, take a break, go to your separate corners for a little bit of time, I think is the vibe we might be able to see.
Yeah.
It's not all sunshine and roses when the sun moves into Scorpio, though. This decan of Scorpio, Scorpio 1, has a synchronization with the Five of Cups. And in that Five of Cups card, we see a cloaked figure in a black cloak that is standing in front of three spilled cups, but with two cups still standing behind him. And there is associations with grief and mourning in this decan, but also Austin calls it a jawbone, where he's talking about desire. The daimon or spirit was in the 36 heirs of the zodiac was the nymphi, which were objects of desire. So I think Scorpio is about that hunger for something that has potentially already outlived its efficacy. And we're going to be face to face when this sun moves into Scorpio 1 with, desiring maybe something that is that needs to be returned to the earth, right? That needs to be let go of. That's the inner tension here in Scorpio, I feel. What do you think about Scorpio as a season in general?
Well, I'm partial to Scorpio. Perhaps that is my Scorpio placements speak.
Mm-hmm.
I have some stuff in this decan of Scorpio. I definitely relate to that theme of hunger. In my case, though, it's Mercury. So it's a hunger for thought and knowledge and communication and other Mercury topics. So tell me more about a hunger for something that needs to be let go.
Yeah, I think that Scorpio is that time of year that is where the fall it becomes solidified, right? So we have this initiation of fall in Libra, but then everything is the leaves in the northern hemisphere are starting to fall from the trees. We instead of the fecundity, like Austin says, of Taurus season, where the microbes are getting active to be able to create fertility, those same microbes are active to be able to break down the old form to create future fertility, right? To be able to go into a rest period. And I think of this as the time where we're preparing to return to spirit. Like in the solar journey of the year in the northern hemisphere, the sun is starting to get weaker, and it is starting to, we're getting to that Sagittarius period where that's the last period before the rebirth of the sun in Capricorn, right? Where the days begin to increase again at the winter solstice. So there's this feeling of like trying to cross the finish line, of trying to separate from a body to be able to, rejoin some kind of collective essence.
And yet, at the same time, experiencing these cravings.
Right.
Just paradox of the decan.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, and think about it again as we get the introduction of the theme in the first decan. We have the solidification of it in the second one. In that second decan, you got the Six of Cups, which is a nostalgic card, where we're like really trying to think about the past, and we're haunted by the memory of an old form on some level. And by the third decan, we're tempted to try to keep something alive that is, now passed into illusion, right? And we can do all sorts of horrible things to like try to keep an old form alive that doesn't have life in it anymore. I'm thinking about like I don't know, like a necromancer or something that, or even like Frankenstein, right? Like all the horrific things to be able to breathe life into something that had died. And maybe you could think of more literary allusions that would be appropriate for.
My brain went straight to Frankenstein. So
yeah. Nice.
Basic high school English bitch over
here. Right. Okay, so we've got Scorpio season. That may be the vibe that we're experiencing with Scorpio season in general. I think that the thing that I would advise is it's important to grieve your losses around this period of time without getting fixated on them. When I have clients that come to me with these placements, I often tell them, feel your feelings, but then shift that perspective towards the gratitude of what you still have. Because in that card, if that figure were to reverse perspective to the cups that were still standing, it would be able to lead them over a bridge to this castle of fulfillment where there's no longer a blockage of a river. So I think that it is important to like acknowledge what we've lost. And maybe in a contract negotiation, there's going to be some things that we had to give up. If we're trying to create a win-win situation, that means that we didn't get every single thing that we wanted. And we may have to give up some of that to be able to move forward and maintain that, whatever that agreement was that we came to. And we're going to see some challenges with the sun. The sun's is in a whole sign square now with Saturn, right?
Yeah.
And on this first decan day, well, not the first decan day, but we're going to start to see, as we move forward through this decan, we're going to have Venus making a square to Neptune. So Venus-Neptune, I have this in my chart. I have a Venus-Neptune opposition, if we're talking about like personal experiences. This one though. This one's funky. What do you think about Venus-Neptune here? What are your initial thoughts on that?
I mean, my brain just keeps stating the word illusions, which is not particularly original or brilliant, but it's what comes to mind. Certainly, it's easy to have romantic delusions with Venus square Neptune. If anybody, I know I've been almost exclusively talking about collective experience in this whole conversation, but I think that will be a time to watch out for your own personal romantic illusions at this. I'm also curious about, Venus still is doing an important job ruling these Libra planets, which are still there, Mercury and Mars. And so I wonder how it's going to affect Venus's position as the ruler of Mars and Mercury, so it's just like the negotiation cleanup crew, working out all those remaining details of whatever has gone on there. So this, it doesn't bode well, I guess, for that task. I would say.
Well, you bring up a good point about the host of these planets, because I think the first week or so of Scorpio season, we are going to feel like we're a little bit in the, in the fog, and not just because of this Venus-Neptune square, but because look at Mars and it trying to provide resources for the sun. They are in aversion to each other now, and not able to, Mars is not able to witness the sun any longer. So yes, that may feel like a relief, but it also could leave us in this feeling of like limbo as well.
About the word that's coming to mind now is hangover. Like,
Yeah, there you go.
tense kind of back and forth going on for so long, trying to work out all these dynamics, relational dynamics and whatnot, and then the sun finally gets some relief, and it's like, okay, I'm gonna take a break, but okay, now I have to start processing what I've lost.
Mm.
And then we have this Venus Neptune square, and as you say, the aversion between the sun and Mars. So I think there's just kind of like a sense of like burnout and just which makes me think probably a good time to schedule some taking it easy.
Yeah.
Retrograde, you've survived Sun Mars conjunction. You've done your best at the negotiating table, and now it's time to sort of just like give yourself some space.
Well, Tarya says we should all schedule a Venus Neptune unicorn ride. So maybe that's what it is, going off in our imagination, right? EY says, a thought crossed my mind, a Venus square Neptune burning through the fog of illusions that have helped facilitate coping mechanisms, which is to say, survive. Right? Survival is what we've been going through the last few weeks. And that is not easy. A hangover that sobers you up to your own folly. Yeah, I could see that too. I think that there is definitely potential for us to act out of character with some of the things that we've been experiencing over the first weeks of October. And, this may be the reality check, the sobering reality of where we really are versus where we wanted to be with the idealization of form with Libra. I think that a couple notes with that Venus Neptune square. This is that third decan of Sagittarius is the 10 of Wands, where we're kind of carrying a burden, a great heavy burden, and feeling exhausted, but also barn eager. That's the word I like for that decan. Like a horse that recognizes it's been on a long journey, but it's ready to. It gets a little burst of energy to like get it home, right? And then Neptune is in that decan that's associated with a crusade or a sacrifice for an ideal. Like, it's a martial decan in Pisces where it's saying, okay, I'm willing to give up everything to get this like spiritual vision. So we again, I think that it speaks to the feelings of being exhausted. I don't know about you, but Neptune stuff always makes me feel tired. It's just like all the energy is just drained out of your body when you have a Neptune type of experience. And maybe it's transcendence, but I don't know. I just feel extreme fatigue.
Fatigue and also like distraction to the point of exhaustion, where like things are pulling my head left and right for so long that eventually I'm just like, I don't know where I am anymore or what I'm doing.
Disorientation. Yeah, for sure. And as we move forward to the 28th of October, we're going to see a sextile between Venus and Jupiter, which that looks nice. I always like those contacts here.
I'm telling you, so many sextiles.
Yeah.
Sextiles. This is the saving grace of the month.
Yes, this sextile saving grace. Say that 7 times succinctly in succession. See, we're getting to the silly part of the show here. Oh, okay. So we've got a nice little sextile between Jupiter and Venus. Probably some sort of assistance on the journey. Hopefully, the rest has done you some good, and you're able to kind of pick up your, get back on the horse and get back back home after the rest at the oasis. That day is also showing us a last quarter moon here, which is a square between the moon in Leo and the sun in Scorpio.
Yeah. Usually
when I see this, I just am like, hey, don't get into a fight that you take a position where you say, I'm right, and no matter what, like your ego or your pride gets involved, something of that nature. because that can get really destructive, especially with some of the other stuff going on. What do you think?
Especially when you've basically got a loose grand cross in fixed signs.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, because we've got yeah, because Saturn's involved too. Um,
Uranus.
yeah, Uranus and okay. So we've got. Oh,
But
geez,
but
you're
it's,
right.
it's coming up. Um,
Ugh, that's yucky.
well, 'cause I was thinking, you said you've taken, hopefully you've gotten some rest and you're ready to get back on the horse. And I was thinking, yeah, I mean, you're gonna have to get back on the horse because we're going into a Sun-Saturn square.
Right.
We got the moon going through fixed signs, encountering all that stuff, and so it brings up my earlier word, which may or may not exist, which I'm pretty sure exists, intransigence. Um,
Yeah.
you know, folks maybe have started to process what they've lost, and they're back to the negotiating table for that last round.
Right.
And it's a moment of digging in. People are going to be digging in their heels.
Mhm.
They say, "Wait, this again? We're still talking about this? No, I'm done." I'm done making concessions. The attempting.
Yeah. Yeah. It's tough when you get these planets squaring off in fixed signs because, like you said, people are just getting entrenched in their own position, and the flexibility that was even maybe even present within a cardinal sign, let alone a mutable sign, is just not nowhere to be seen around this period of time. Um, we've got two things happening on October the 30th. What is that? All Hallows Eve, right? You've got a phone call from the divine that you need to answer. Like, I feel like I'm like doing secretarial duty here on this live stream as well. Hello, Township Farmers Market. Like, anyway, so this is actually probably one of the most important aspects of the month is this Sun Saturn square. We've gone through the negotiation phase, and we've seen whatever results have come from that. Either agreement or breakdown of an agreement, and then we're getting into this point where we're grieving the loss, and we're coming face to face with the reality, the sober reality of what we are, what we're facing, right?
Yeah. Honestly, what it makes me wonder if, I think there's going to be many different circumstances that sort of manifest these narratives we're talking about, and they're not all going to end the same way. But it does make me wonder, if there's going to be some areas of, our lives and what's happening in our collective sphere where they don't work out a deal.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Where things just don't work out.
An impasse, right?
Impasse that really lasts is possible in some areas, with so many different kinds of negotiations happening. And this could be a moment where the negotiations that have really stalled might be clear now, like, okay, that's a truly an impasse. That's actually not going to happen. They're not going to figure that out.
Yeah.
With this Sun Saturn square and with Mars entering Scorpio, and thus reintroducing the Mars Saturn Uranus complex that we have already lived through once this year.
I don't like
Once
it.
or twice.
I don't like.
Yeah.
I mean, Mars squared Saturn is tough. I mean, that's an overcoming square from a super powerful Mars to a super powerful Saturn. I mean, think of it like this. If, Mars is weak in Libra, right? It's kind of like, okay, I'm going to fight, but I'm going to like do it with a smile. I'm going to stab you in the back with a smile on my face, right? But when it gets into Scorpio, that's when like all out, like legitimate warfare breaks out, right? Where it's like, okay, I'm actually coming for you ninja style in the night. And, like ruthless intensity to get what you want, right?
Yeah.
It makes me nervous.
Yeah. And we've got a newly Eastern rising Mars. While it's still invisible, but
Mm-hmm.
it has some fresh enthusiasm, right?
Oh yeah.
It's ready. It's got morning energy, let's say. Um, and then we have a direct Saturn. Uh,
Right.
and I think on some level we're kind of looking ahead into November. I think the last few days of October really just introduce what will be the main narrative of the following month.
Hmm.
Like I think the main story of October is over at this point, and now we're getting into like something that's not going to really be played out and clarified until later into November. And it definitely starts here, right around Halloween. Uh,
Yeah. Well, and think about this too. Like, if Mars wants to take action and move forward, it's hitting the brick wall of Saturn here. You know, it's saying, I mean, to me, this is frustrated action and all that entails. Because of there is a collective need to maybe take a step back and not do something. And then all the feelings, the intensity of feeling and the grief that comes up. Sometimes when people are faced with loss, that's when they start lashing out. So I think it's a dignified Mars, but that can be for better or for worse. Like, there could be situations that require that type of martial courage, but there could also be the other situations where just the misfortune part of Mars, like the bad fortune, the bad 2K, where that is increased as well.
yeah.
So
And
interesting.
Mars and Scorpio, I'm thinking about strategy. This is a strategic Mars. It's not Mars and Aries just kind of like showing off with its kind of wild sword play, right?
Right.
Um, this is Mars that's really has kind of frightening intensity and intention to succeed in its aims, but coming up against Saturn, which I think is going to be a pretty an epic showdown for the ages.
Yeah.
And just thinking about how the sun is caught up in this. Was the sun nearby in the last, like in the Mars Saturn opposition? Um, in that was in like June and July. So I think the sun was not entangled in that,
Mm,
but it
when
was
they were opposite this
this
July.
earlier this year, yeah. Because I'm thinking
Uh,
it's a story where basically Mars comes around and triggers the Saturn Uranus square from fixed signs. It was in Aquarius at the beginning of the year. It was in
yeah. I think the sun might have been involved in that because that was around Leo season that was happening. I'd have to look for sure, but definitely probably some revisiting of some similar themes that we were going through with that as well. Um, yeah, I think that we've got some nice comments coming in here. Uh, EY is saying like a thief in the night for sure. Um, D is saying it sounds like a build up to something and Lisa says I don't like it. No phone call first before the attack. Yeah, yeah, I agree, and it might be a build up to something, and I will give you a date to really keep in mind to where whatever is brewing here is probably going to manifest. And I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I just want to show you real quick the moment that I think this whatever it is bubbling over. This is when Mars makes its heliacal rise at 15 degrees of Scorpio, right as the sun moves into Sagittarius on November the 22nd. So just mark that on your calendar, and whatever is going on with the Scorpio stuff, like it's probably going to become visible. And recognize that this Mars is one that's willing to plot a demise as long as it takes, right? Like, it's not like, oh, I lash out, like you said with Aries, and then it's done. No, it's like if you wrong this Mars, it's going to file it away, write it down, and say, okay, I'm going to make my strategy for complete annihilation when you least expect it, which makes it very dangerous.
And also at that point, it's free from the square to Saturn. So it's separating from Saturn, separating from that constraint by the
Right.
time it's visible.
Right. And it's just gone through that opposition to Uranus.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Mark it down, but we're getting ahead of ourselves. But anyway, that's what we've got for October. Wow, we did it.
Yeah.
Uh, so just a few things before we wrap up here. At the end of these, I like to do an I Ching to talk about the essence of the month, and do an animal to give people maybe some things to think about and ways to deal with this energy. We've outlined what could or could not happen, but what do we do to be able to work through it? And that's what I like the I Ching for. And in this I Ching reading I did, I got one hexagram that had no changing lines, and it was number 47, and that's called oppression. Other interpretations of this translate to exhaustion, being restricted, hardship, adversity, inner affliction, dried up. So there is an image of a river that was draining away a lake so that it became like barren and did not support life anymore. So inner exhaustion and outer oppression. Or a tree that is trying to grow but is in a very tight space and is cut off from the things that it needs to truly spread its wings or its branches or its leaves or whatever metaphor I'm trying to mix there. And then one other thing I will say about that, there is a translation that I like by Jack Balkin, where he has a quote about this. The oracle says, "Oppression, success, with perseverance, the great person brings about good fortune, no blame. What one says is not believed." So he explains this oracle as a test of character, being able to wait out the hardship and stay grounded and centered, which sounds a lot like Libra 3, right? And remaining determined. Use your inner tranquility is the key, connecting to the center of the wheel rather than getting cast about by all the twists and turns of fate and fortune. And one thing that stuck out to me is he says that it's easy to have faith in peaceful times, but the test of your faith really comes when you are facing difficulties and when things get rough. I think that may be what we're facing here as a potential difficult time that requires faith and extra effort in that regard. And then the animal that we got here was the shark. And the shark has significations of determination, strength, speed, ruthlessness. Like when a shark wants something, it's not going to be denied. It's going to go full speed and with teeth bared, right? So potentially with a shark, maybe there is a need for tact, a caution that we can become frenzied or agitated if we don't slow down. A happy shark is one that's just kind of, going through the current at a leisurely pace. I would also suggest maybe some exercise or blowing off some steam. Get yourself moving so that you don't have all this tension built up. But again, check your ambition as well. There's what I've noticed over the last few years, and you can attest to this, Jared, is that a lot of people have had certain dreams that they had for their life, and they've really had to make certain adjustments, whether it's delayed gratification or completely changing that ideal completely. And that's difficult. And I think that requires a lot of mental discipline and mental focus that I think that Saturn is asking from us. What do you think about that, about pursuing a dream within a period of collective crisis?
It just makes me think of that Four of Swords card.
Yeah.
Just with so much ongoing uncertainty and frustration, that image of the guy lying down in that state of repose, state of meditation. And we know from our discussion, there's a lot of, inner turmoil that's happening. And this is how he gets through,
Mm-hmm.
And I think all of us, especially with, these, adding these layers of, oppression and sharks, we're all going to be called upon to seek that kind of inner peace, navigating very uncertain terrain, and and just like this kind of standoff energy
Yeah,
we've been talking about.
absolutely. So everybody out there, it may get a little rough this month, but hang in there, cultivate all of the things that you've Learn to keep yourself peaceful. Maybe bring that peace to your environment. Slow down. Rest if you need to rest. Try to create win-win situations. Be honest, especially at that new moon, so that you don't create more challenges for yourself in the future through maybe not through potentially having an integrity lapse. And we'll get through this together, right? As a community, and hopefully we'll come out on the other side with some kind of new reality that's more fair and equitable for everyone, not just for a select few. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
I said, and back up your computer.
Oh, yes, there you go. Yes.
It's ready. Good now.
Mercury retrograde, right?
It'll be in September, but still.
Yeah. Yeah, back up your data. Okay. So for those of you out there, if you are new to this channel, please hit that subscribe button. You can help us out by hitting the like. If you want to make a material donation to the work that I do, you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com. Also have that Decans webinar coming up soon. Remember that the early bird pricing ends on October the 1st, so make sure you sign up before then if you want to get 20% off. Mercurius, where can we find you, and what kind of things do you offer for our participants here today?
Yeah, so I have a website. It is just mercuriusgeorge.com. I believe it is below in the description. Mercurius spelled as if it were some kind of Latin term, which I don't know if it is. Maybe it is. And I mostly at this point I do readings, consultations, birth charts, and transits and whatnot. I have plenty of openings in October. Well, not that much, but I have openings in October. I will probably take a break in November. So if you're interested in having a reading with me, I would suggest that you take a look at my calendar. And by the way, if you have trouble finding a time that works for you, always feel free to send me an email. Otherwise, I'm just always studying. I feel like my main thing with astrology is I'm just trying to catch up on the stuff that I have learned a little bit about, but not enough. So that's kind of my main pursuit other than readings. And you will also find me on Twitter at Mercurius George, which is my sort of home base, being a bit of a clown. So hope to see you there.
Yeah.
And thanks so much to everybody who stuck around for this epic conversation. It was really fun. And this is my first time kind of like stepping out even this much to use my voice in a live recording. So it was really fun for me, and thank you, Spencer, for having me. I'm glad we got to do it.
It's my pleasure, man. I you did a great job, and this is not going to be the last. I guarantee it. Like you have a really great way of contextualizing things, and you're a great storyteller too. And I've always enjoyed that ability that you had with your music as well. So I hope that you keep up with it, and I would love to have you back on here to do this again.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks everyone for hanging with us today, and we will see you the next time. I'm going to have Melissa LaFara on October the 1st to talk about the new moon in Libra. So make sure that you tune in for that. You can set a reminder, and we'll see you the next time. Thank you, everyone. Take it easy.
Thank you.
Okay.